Hello and good morning. I hope you're all comfortable in your seats. Have you got your coffee? I am Poppy Carnell. I work for MLEX as a trade reporter, and I have the absolute pleasure of moderating this panel today. It's organised by Forum Europe in conjunction with Alibaba, and the topic, as I'm sure you know, is SMEs and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Now, before I introduce you to the panel, I wanted to ask you a question. How many SMEs do you think in the EU export? And by that I mean, how many sell anywhere outside their own member state? Do you think it's a lot? Well, Alibaba commissioned YouGov to conduct a survey for over 2,000 SMEs to ask that very question. We have just a couple of slides. Don't get scared. There's only a couple, and they are fascinating in their results. So the question they asked was, here's the beginning slide. May I have the next slide, please? How can policymakers make it possible for more SMEs to start exporting their goods and easier for businesses that already do? The results were, if I may, okay, going back to my original question, 52% of companies sell internationally. Did you think that's a lot? Or do you think there's more room for improvement? Now, the fascinating question that they were asking SMEs about what these barriers are, we have the results right in front of you. Now, obviously, transport costs would be one of the first, I suppose. If you're moving your goods, then that's going to be an extra cost. 18% lack of personnel and resources. Okay, that's, again, it's a cost. But 15% not understanding various local regulations. Arguably, if you have the personnel in place, then you have someone that can take that time to understand various regulations. But then which do you do first? Do you make that leap and employ someone if you're unsure and not confident if there's going to be enough support for your export? And that's what we'd like to discuss today. And you can see there's other ones on the slide. Insufficient language skills, complications, of course, due to COVID, 13%, still very important. High tariffs at 12%. That's obviously, we're looking there outside the EU. And the EU is always in negotiations with various countries to lower those tariffs, but they are still a barrier for these SMEs. 10% concerns about fraud and payment security. And then you can see that at the end, the bottom end of the scale is technology, 6 and 5%, not having access to technology or not understanding how to use technology. So that is still a barrier, but it's interesting that it's not the biggest barrier. So it would be really interesting to hear from our panelists on what else they think needs to be addressed if technology is, okay, obviously a concern, but what else can they do to help these businesses? Let's see the next slide, please. Okay, so what can policymakers do about it? Over half of SMEs who export internationally say it's either significant or essential for their business. 54%. And you can see from this slide what those main problems are. Paperwork and bureaucracy being the top one, 42% for all SMEs and 48% for SMEs who export. So that's an interesting one because you would think that that's one that we could overcome. Certainly in FTAs, in free trade agreements, that is something that they do try and help SMEs with, and obviously the larger companies too. But still, it's almost half the group is saying that that's still their biggest concern. Making cross-border payments easier and more affordable, almost a third, and a similar size on better informing SMEs about cross-border e-commerce options. This is information. This is about how SMEs can feel more confident in these processes. Again, also with red tape, if they know the system, maybe they'd feel more confident. Can I see the next slide, please? What are the future impacts? Now, a huge 81% agree that online marketplaces make it much easier to sell internationally. as opposed to using localized websites. 59% say they are either likely to or already have started selling an online marketplace in response to COVID. So big percentage have made that leap. Be interesting to know whether that's specifically because of COVID. And the next slide, please. And finally, why are we all here today? How can the EU help? How can we move this forward? Because it's not just about identifying problems, of course, it's about finding the solutions. So if there's going to be help, there needs to be deeper harmonization of the single market and increased consideration for the impact of new regulation on SMEs. So addressing regulatory fragmentation, ensuring that member states have programs and policies in place to support SMEs, build digital global payment channels, and highlight advantages of cross-border trade, and offer guidance and support. So you can see that there's all the different layers and levels here of, from the top of the tree in the EU, all the way down through different levels of authority, national and local authority too, and also, interestingly, what companies can do. So those are the slides. I told you it wasn't going to be painful, and that there's some really interesting things there that it would be great to start unpicking. So I'm going to introduce you to our panel. We have Felicia Stenuscu, who is head of unit for the Secretariat General in Recovery and Resilience Task Force at the European Commission. Good morning, Felicia. Maria Munoz, who is Deputy Director General for the SME Support at the Ministry for Industry in Spain. Annalisa Barbagallo, Head of Government Relations for Europe in Alibaba. Lina Konstantinopoulou, Policy Director for Euro Chambers. Max Milokau, Business Unit Manager for Marketing, Sales and Export for Launstein Confiserie. And Andrea Gradassi, who's founder of Terra Francescani. So I'm going to give you each just a couple of minutes, and I will get strict if we go over that time. Start waving. Just a couple of minutes to outline what your initial thoughts are from these slides. If Felicia, you would like to go first.
Thank you, Poppy, and very nice to be here at this event. Looking forward to hearing all the presentations and maybe getting some interesting questions from the audience. So I'm here to talk mainly about the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we really believe that the facility will give a major boost to SMEs to implement the EU SME strategy. As you know, SMEs are really at the heart of everything that we do in Europe. There's the SME strategy, there's the recent update of the industrial policy, and those have the SMEs at their heart. And the facility, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, can offer unprecedented support for, in general, making our economies more resilient, making our companies more competitive, and in particular, making our SMEs more competitive. And we, the Commission, we have encouraged member states to strongly target SMEs in their national recovery and resilience plans. And as we are starting to adopt those plans, you have seen that we have adopted 12 already. There are really good things in there for SMEs. And what we see in the plans, and we're very happy with, there's direct support for SMEs and there's indirect support. So there are many measures to help SMEs get set up and grow in the form of reducing regulatory barriers, so the things that you saw on the slides, improving the business environment, improving company law, for instance, introducing startup laws or reducing the minimum capital required to set up a company, supporting entrepreneurship and growth by SMEs, and very importantly, providing access to finance. So either direct access to finance from the Recovery and Resilience Facility or through financial instruments that are set up to help companies and SMEs in particular. And this is in addition to other funds that the Commission and the EU has for that purpose, like the Invest EU, for instance, which has an SME window. And then there's the green and digital transition. There will be massive investment in to support the green and digital transitions. So there will be an extraordinary increase in demand, which we hope that the SMEs will benefit from. There are important measures in all the plans to support the digitalization of SMEs. And I think this is an important factor to help with exports and e-commerce and web sales. And there are broader measures in general that will benefit SMEs, like investments in R&D activities. There is support in various plans for various sectors of the economies, which are typically where SMEs are important, like tourism and culture and social services. And then finally, of course, many of these actions that are foreseen by member states will be awarded through open calls for tender. And here we have paid a lot of attention that procurement rules and the EU procurement directives are respected, and SMEs are given a fair chance to compete in these calls for tender. I would stop here, Poppy. I hope I haven't exceeded my time, and I'll be happy to come in later on.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Maria, would you like to go next?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable. Well, the impact of COVID-19 in Spain has been quite severe due to the relevance of sectors such as tourism or retail or transport. And SMEs and especially micro enterprises have suffered the biggest impact with the biggest decrease in turnover and employment during 2020. So to counteract the effects of the crisis in Spain, we've implemented, as in many other countries, short-term policies such as liquidity measures, solvency support measures, and debt restructuring and second chance mechanisms in order to counteract in the short term the effects. But in the long term, we see that we need specific and well-designed policies that we will be implementing in the coming years, as the impact of the crisis has been uneven across sectors. So in this context, as Felicia has introduced, the Spanish Recovery and Resilience Plan envisages to invest in a first phase 70 billion euros from the Recovery and Resilience Facility in 21-23 in order to boost recovery and achieve the greatest possible counter-cyclical impacts, and with a special focus on SMEs as they are at the center of recovery. Very briefly, the plan earmarks 40%, which is a lot of the resources allocated to the green transition, and 29% to the digital transformation. So to conclude, what are the main challenges that we have to address now? Well, I would say that first of all, we need to combine these short-term measures put in place during the crisis with structural measures with a long-term perspective. Second, we need specific policies for those sectors most affected by the crisis and for those agents such as SMEs in order to speed up recovery. Third, we need to combine in this plan it is a very ambitious agenda with investments and reforms to achieve a sustainable recovery and economic growth. And last, we can also, and we have also, to exploit opportunities, in particular for SMEs, such as the accelerated digital transition, entrepreneurship in innovative areas, internationalization, or reinforcing the role of industry in the European economy. So, well, threats to face, but also opportunities that we have to take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Annalisa, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Poppy. Maybe just a few words about why we have commissioned this survey. So at Alibaba, we have a mission to make it easy to do business anywhere. So we support SMEs. It's really in our DNA. It's the reason we were set up 20 years ago, to help SMEs use technology to export globally. What we've seen is that technology has leveled the playing field and has created these opportunities, and I think this is also reflected in some of the results of the survey. But what we do see as we start working more and more with SMEs across Europe is that there are still barriers, particularly to exporting. We were fairly surprised by our survey in the 6 markets of Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and Poland, that only about half of the respondents are actually selling internationally. And by internationally, we mean selling outside of the member state, also within the EU. So there's still a lot to do in terms of just even completing the single market, given that one of the obstacles that the SMEs have raised more frequently was the regulatory burden. Whether that is true or whether there is a perception, it's clear that that is still an obstacle. And there are ways that these issues could be addressed. So we think, we hope, and we're confident that the work that the EU and the member states are putting into this great project of the Next Generation Europe and the Recovery and Resilience Facility will go some way, and hopefully a long way, to help more and more SMEs export across the EU and outside of the EU. So the idea of this survey and now of this discussion was to really bring together the voice of the SMEs, and we have 2 guests present who are actively selling on our platforms, and policymakers on the other side, and see how we can overcome these obstacles. We can have a discussion on what more needs to be done to make sure that all of the SMEs take full advantage of the technologies and of the opportunities that there are to truly trade across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalisa. Lina, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Alibaba and, of course, Forum Europe for the invitation. A few things about Eurochambre. It's one of the largest business representative organization in Brussels, representing 20 million companies, over 45 members, and a European network of 1,700 regional and local chambers of commerce, and 93% of these businesses represent small and medium-sized enterprises. So again, the issue of SMEs, of course, we have been tackling it for some time now. So of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has put a lot of, has put the integrity of the single market, of course, under the heavy strain. The single market is considered, of course, by our businesses, one of the biggest benefits of the EU. But even before the virus outbreak, our companies in the chamber network were, of course, a bit complaining about the lack of integration in the single market and the different rules. So we have commissioned ourselves 2 studies. One is on the barriers in the single market, where nearly 70% of the entrepreneurs in the EU answered no to the question, is the single market sufficiently integrated? So, of course, this figure is quite high. And one of the obstacles for the entrepreneurs were complex administrative procedures of 79%, said that this was, of course, one of the significant problems. And again, 71% of the responses said harmonization of national regulations on online consumer protection is, of course, desirable. Now, we also commissioned another survey of in 20 countries and we received 600 replies of women entrepreneurs and their impact to COVID. And of course, 67% of women entrepreneurs had to adapt their business model with respect to the pandemic. So we saw a switch from offline to online services, adoption of software, different business concepts. They all were also compelled also to initiate digital transformation, and they didn't have the capacity to do it without skills. So, and of course, part of the survey, we also had issues on impact to import and export. And again, here, I want to point out one of the issues with respect to, let's use the 45 applied trade agreements that we have. We need to have, again, a positive global agenda. And of course, this will help quite a lot in the discussion. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is, of course, a great opportunity, but let's keep in mind that in order to successfully implement this, this whole transition to digital and green, we need to have good involvement of stakeholders, both regional and local authorities, because they are the ones that can translate these EU instruments, of course, to projects, and SMEs can also take advantage of this in more viable, let's say, projects to the ground. So let's keep attention, of course, to the monitoring and assessment of these recovery and resilience plans. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't take too much time.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And Max, would you like to go next?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So we are basically a premium producer of chocolates and pralines. We are a third-generation family business, and we're selling around 50% of our goods to department stores and specialized traders. Around 8 to 10% we're doing export. We're increasingly doing e-commerce. That's been on our growth agenda for the past couple of years. We've entered the Chinese market, I think 3 years ago, and I think the total share of export to China right now is over 30% of our entire export. The rest goes to Europe, and we were really at the front line of the pandemic, because from one day to another we were faced with a situation where our airline business, for example, we were a supplier of Lufthansa, just went belly up. The shops were closed, the department stores were closed, so we were forced to implement measures like short-term labor for our staff, and we also needed to apply for some government aids. So that was not always easy. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. When we look at the German government, which granted some aids for revenue losses, it's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of work that resources we have to invest in order to receive support. We also get a financial loan, a good interest rate loan from the KfW banking group, which allowed us to compensate for the losses. So it's a difficult situation. However, anyway, many of the results of the study I can agree with. The boundaries for export are definitely over-regulation, different regulations in the countries, and when you export to more than one country, you need to train your staff, because the rules and regulations are changing on a regular basis. And also the transport costs we're facing at the moment. I think container costs have increased since the start of the pandemic by a factor of 5. So that's also a limiting factor at the moment that we are facing. But yeah, so that's just a little overview of our situation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And Andrea, would you like to round up?
Yes, good morning. Mr. Max told exactly what I wanted to say, because we are more or less in the same business, because he produces wonderful chocolates. I just saw his website, and really amazing. We supply to, for example, the airplane companies with the small dressings. So we had a big loss in turnover with this kind of sector, but also in all the tourism sector, restaurants, because Italy is in the same situation of Spain. We lost tourism, we lost a lot of business with the Eureka sector. And even the food companies had less problem respect other sector, because we could switch our focus on the business. But so if we save the turnover, but we lost a lot of profit margin, because we sold to other sector with different types of margin and opportunities. So now that here the COVID is started to be a little bit weaker, we need helps from the European community, but we do not want money. We need helps to the export. We need to do again exhibition. We need to export again. So we need some help to find new clients, new opportunities. But alone for a small companies to restart again is not easy. So for example, Alibaba for us was a new opportunity to reach other clients without make physical exhibition, physical fairs, because I agree with all the export barriers that that you show us in the slides, but the biggest barrier is to reach the right client for every company. So in my opinion, we need help to export again. We need help to make new exhibition, new fairs, new promotion in the stores, in the restaurants, in the supermarkets. So post-COVID could be a good opportunity, but we must make focus in how spend the money.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, we've got lots there that we want to dig into now. Just a reminder for everyone, you've heard everyone speaking. If you've got some burning questions, please do just pop them in the chat window to the side there, and I will try and get them answered for you. But I will kick off. Actually, I just wanted to go back to Max and Andrea. Max, you were saying that regulation was one of the biggest barriers. Just very quickly, did you mean outside of the EU, or was that also within the EU?
Well, it's predominantly outside the EU. There's certain ingredients which are simply not allowed in certain countries, and to keep a track of all of that is really difficult. If you take the US market, for example, that's a really complicated market, because you need to have an importer, a distributor, a wholesaler. So by the time the products reach the customers, the prices are so high that it's not affordable to them. So that is obviously quite a big barrier. There's a recent trade deal with Japan. I think that's going to make, between the EU and Japan, that's going to make it easier. But that's a limiting factor, the regulation in the individual countries.
Andrea, I see you nodding. Is it the same for your business? And is there somewhere that you can go to find these regulations? How do you work all this out?
No, I agree with Max. We have the same problems, and for me, we need less bureaucracy and less regulation to export our product. This could be, for example, there are a lot of hidden costs that are charged on the product. For example, every country has a different regulation about labels and paperwork to do, and we need something more easy.
Felicia, I'd like to go to you. When you're hearing this, what are your thoughts? Do you think there's something more that the European Commission can do, or do you think there's something that you can point us to that they can already help with?
I mean, personally, when I hear this, my first thought is I want to help, and how can I help?
That's good to hear.
I mean, to be honest, when you made the presentation, I actually had in mind much worse statistics. So the 52% of SMEs that are exporting is much better than what the statistics I had in mind looking at the various Commission materials. And I think it's because it's a group of five or six of the biggest countries. If you look broader at the EU, actually the percentages are much lower of SMEs that export. And then if you dig even deeper into companies and SMEs that use e-commerce and have web sales to the EU or outside the EU, that percentage decreases even further. So there is certainly a lot to be done, and I hear in terms of regulatory barriers, and there is, this recovery and resilience facility and the plans are not just about money. So it was encouraging to hear that it's not just money that is needed, but they're not just about money. So in fact, the plans had to also address reforms and to include reforms. And many of those reforms, if you look at the plans, are about improving the business environment and reducing regulatory burden. And these reforms come from country-specific recommendations, which are made to member states every year, and a lot are in those areas of business environment and regulatory burdens. So, I mean, I'm encouraged by the fact that many plans include those types of reforms, and they come with funding for instance, digitalization. So digitalization of administrative processes, digitalization of public administration, creating one-stop shops, or creating or making it possible for a company to get set up digitally. So there's a lot there so there's investment in digitalization that will go hand in hand with these reforms on simplifying the business environment.
Maria, what do you think can be done at member state level to bring SMEs into the conversation more, and so that they feel more confident with some of these barriers that we're looking at here?
Well, following the arguments of the Felicia from the European Commission, well, we've seen a positive consequence, if I may say so, from this crisis, which is a deep reflection on global value chains and about the role of enterprises, industrial enterprises, but in particular SMEs in this global value chain. So we are reflecting right now in the European Union on this open strategic autonomy that is going to be discussed in the coming months. This is going to change, I think, the way in which we participate in global value chains. The role of industry, as I mentioned before, very important for member states like Spain, very dependent on the services sector, such as tourism. And I think that we will be able to relocate in Europe some of the activities that started to be done in third countries, very far from here, as we've seen the effects when a crisis like this one occurred, how, and as Max, for example, said, how manufacturing was impossible. We could not continue with our businesses and with our normal activities. So I think this is going to be positive for enterprises, for the industrial sector, and for SMEs. I think that we also need to improve our crisis preparedness for the future, and also identify strategic dependencies. So I think that many things will change in the future, and that's for sure an opportunity for countries like us to take this the lead in reinforcing the role of industry in particular.
Lena, would you like to come in here?
Yes, actually, yeah, I would like also to reply to both Andrea and Max, and also, of course, to the Commission and also to the Ministry and the role. First of all, I would like to point out what is the role of the Chamber of Commerce, and because I heard with great, let's say, care up and attention on what Andrea and Max said about their need to address the whole trade agreements and what's happening in each of the trade agreements implementation. As I said before, we have so many trade agreements, and currently all of our national chambers of commerce are, let's say, monitoring these trade agreements, and they could be a great, let's say, source of information for you. That's one side. And so during the pandemic, of course, we had a huge role to assist entrepreneurs in difficulties. We had to find solutions for SMEs because they were in lockdown mode. And at the same time, we had to be an intermediary between the government and also the SMEs themselves. So our role there was, quite important from, to bring trusted source of information and also to ensure that we are part, of the needs process. Now, with respect to let's also give you an example. For example, in Austria, 70% of the recovery and resilience plans will go to SMEs and 10% will go indirectly to SMEs. So, and then we know that from the implementation side, the Austrian Chamber of Commerce is part of the, of the implementation of several projects with respect to, implementing the whole project of a recovery and resilience plan with respect to SMEs. So I am, putting up some solutions with respect on how can we be involved in the process from the Chambers of Commerce to help bring the gap between the government and also the SMEs themselves. Because we are there to provide this, EU instruments into real practical practice. We can provide the dissemination of information. We can do campaigns for the SMEs. They can really be, aware of what are their opportunities and what they can achieve throughout the process. And again, we need also to be more to the ground with respect of how this, at the moment, as I saw a bit, the recovery and resilience plans, if we can translate them all in English, then SMEs, and especially Andrea and Max and all these SMEs that are doing business also all over Europe, they can know and they can bid for public procurement processes. They can be part of the process. So I am pointing out the involvement of chambers in the process, especially in the monitoring and the implementation side, because I've seen so many examples on how we can help in practical terms. But also to make sure that, we are, because this is a huge opportunity. So let's not waste it. So this is.
Lena, just very quickly. Obviously, you're sort of representing the individual chambers of commerce, but sort of going down the chain to the SMEs. Do you feel that the SMEs that get information and get this help there's a divide between those that are sort of aware of you and of your associations compared to those that aren't? I mean, is there anything? What I mean is, how can you reach the SMEs that aren't linked to Euro chambers and the other chambers of commerce?
As you know, in many countries, a chamber of commerce is much more linked to the ministry. So we are part of, let's say, the community of that. Others are more private-oriented approach. But again, SMEs, and our role is really to represent SMEs. So our main scope is really to provide information on the funding opportunities, on ensuring that there are no barriers to trade. So we can ensure also that the single market is, let's say, is there for people, for services, both of course online, etc. And of course, we can get these projects in practical terms, and how they can reach us is, of course, we are there at the local, regional level, and we are more than happy, of course, to be part of the process. But there needs to be a clear cooperation among the national ministries of transport right now, national ministries at the moment, and also the chambers, to ensure that this money and this funding will be used in the correct way. And I know that, for example, Maria, I know that you are also quite in contact as well with the Spanish Chamber of Commerce. So there are links, and this is, I think, the best example for implementation of the RRPs.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, for companies, it's great if they know where they're going and if they know that those things are actually there to reach out to in the first place. Annalisa, would you like to come in here? What are your thoughts on barriers for SMEs and how policymakers can help?
Yeah, thank you, Poppy. We have actually a few good examples of cooperation that we've put in place in the last few years. I just wanted to mention trade fairs, and Andrea mentioned that trade fairs are extremely important for SMEs. So we have we've basically brought some of these trade fairs online. So we work with established trade fairs across Europe to make them online events, and that has actually helped SMEs even during lockdown to reach potential customers across the world. We have an agreement in place with the Italian Trade Agency that offers concrete support to SMEs on our platforms. And concrete support is not just money, which is of course very important for SMEs that want to market themselves, because let's not forget that once you get on a marketplace, you also have to make yourself seen and known. So they have funds available for that, but they also provide training to SMEs on how to behave on a marketplace in conjunction with us. I think there's a role for marketplaces to play as well in the recovery, in knowing its customers, knowing its sellers, knowing what works for them and what doesn't work for them, where they can go. Not every SME is ready to export to China, for example. We're extremely careful about, having the right supply chain in place, the right capability to export to markets that are so far away and so demanding. But we're seeing huge success with SMEs exporting within the EU and to other markets. Whether it's Russia, whether it's South America, we're seeing very small SMEs that, once they're ready to export within the EU, it's actually, just one step further to go outside of the EU, and that could have huge, huge benefits. So there's all these things that governments can do to help. And as Andrea was saying, it's not just about money, it's about reaching potential customers. Further down the chain, we've seen that language and culture is still perceived as a huge barrier, and we're talking about English, which we know is still a barrier, particularly for SMEs in southern member states. So we hope that further down the line, there's going to be investments in actual education, in training, education, language skills, understanding culture. If a product is super successful in Germany or Italy or anywhere else, it doesn't mean that it's immediately going to translate into another market. You need to adapt the products. You need to make sure that a company going outside of its national market, because that's a tendency to retrench into its national market, and we've seen that with COVID, also understands the labeling, the ingredients, the cultural sensitivities to using certain products or marketing in a certain way. And again, there is work that all of us can do, whether it's with the chambers, with governments, marketplaces themselves, and companies to really help SMEs profit. Because we give technology. For us, technology is a given. Connectivity is a given. Anyone with a mobile phone can, in theory, sell across the world. We have examples of remote areas in Bangladesh where they're, on 2G or 3G, they're already exporting. So there's no excuse for companies. There's no excuse not to say that technology is the biggest barrier. And we think that has been reflected in the survey results as well.
Just going back to industry, Max, you operate in China. You sell to a large portion of your businesses is in China. When you were setting that up, what would have been the most helpful thing for you? Or indeed, maybe these barriers still exist for you now. What would be the most helpful?
I think alone we would not have succeeded. There's a language barrier. There's the time difference. E-commerce works really fast. So you need to respond really fast. If the customer has a question, then they want it to be answered instantly, basically. And this is a service that we cannot provide from Germany. So you need a strong partner on the ground who knows the regulations, who knows the market. It would be presumptuous to say, I know what the Chinese customer wants. So you need to get feedback, local feedback. So I think that's a big takeaway. Other than that, yeah, we've tried a lot. We've tried a lot of products. As Annalisa mentioned, what sells in Germany doesn't necessarily sell in China. We have a Christmas tin. That's an article we only sell on during Christmas, but that's an all year round bestseller in China. So you need to adopt. You need to open your mind and be more. Be open-minded to different cultures and take the influences on the market and really learn about that. But it's a hard process. No one can do it for you. You need to make your negative experiences as well as positive experiences.
Andrea, you said that one of the biggest barriers for companies was making sure that they were reaching the right clients for them. Can you expand on that, given what Max has just said? You're sort of nodding with what Max is saying? Oh, you're on mute. Can you unmute, Andrea?
Sorry.
Lovely.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Right now, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
No, I always agree with Max. I agree with him. And yes, the big barrier is to, obviously it depends by the company, but for a company like mine that doesn't produce a mass market, to find the right client is not easy, because we need to find a client that can understand and resell a quality product. So it's not easy. So another barrier is how to communicate, how to market this, our skills, our quality, our history, passion, tradition to the final consumer outside of Italy, also outside of Europe. So with other culture, with other food culture, and so another way to help company like mine is to help in the communication to the market, into the social network, to the newspaper, to reach the right client.
We're getting some questions now from the audience, which is great. Do keep sending them in. It'd be great to hear what that sort of get a feel for what everyone's thinking in the audience. So I've got a question here from Jerome Plantinga, who is the EU Affairs Manager for Hazelberg, which is on grant support. Felicia, this is for you. Which countries have submitted a plan on the RRP for the RFF? And can you unpick these wonderful acronyms for us? And when will these be adopted by the Commission and the European Parliament?
Okay, I thought everybody knows this. At least we have these statistics at the tip of our fingers.
Just to make it global.
24 countries, member states, have submitted so far their plans, formally submitted their plans. We're only missing 3 from Malta, the Netherlands, and Bulgaria. Of the 24 that have been submitted, we have already adopted 12, meaning that we have positively assessed 12 of these plans, and we have adopted a proposal for a council implementing decision. So now the ball is in the council's court. And those 12, if you're interested, are Portugal, Spain, Greece, Denmark, Luxembourg, Austria, Slovakia, Latvia, Germany, Italy, Belgium, and France. And then for the remaining 12 of the 24, we're continuing to work on that as fast as we can. And we will continue adopting some of them in the coming weeks. Whereas for others, we have agreed with the member states in question to adopt those, to have a longer assessment period, since summer months are coming, and therefore we will be adopting some of them in September, if all goes well, of course.
Another question here from Elsa Groen, who is the Director General for Independent Retail Europe. With regard to promoting intra-EU trade, the minimum harmonization of consumer law should be abandoned. The EU has a very high level of consumer protection, even at the minimum level. What are the possibilities of doing this? Lina, would you like to come in there? And I think you also had a response for Felicia. So would you like to take the floor?
The European Commission is yeah, I'm unmuted, sorry. I know that the European Commission is currently preparing the Digital Service Act, where the, let's say, the point of consumer law is particularly mentioned there. So again, there are some minimum requirements for the protection of users with respect to the Digital Service Act, which is about protecting users from online services, of course. Again, I think the question is minimum harmonization of consumer law. There are some guidelines there on the Digital Service Act. So yeah, I think we just need to keep up with this legislation to discuss about these consumer law requirements, I think. I do not know whether Annalisa wants to shed some light more on that.
Sure. I don't know whether it's really our role. I think as a general comment, we do think there should be a balance, and probably that's where the question was coming from. We think it's obviously consumer protection is paramount, and we believe that consumers will only come to our marketplaces, for example, if they feel protected and if they trust the marketplaces and the sellers. On the other hand, it's really important that any piece of consumer legislation and generally Commission legislation takes into account the impact and the concrete impact that it could have on SMEs. We've seen, I won't bore you with the details, but we've seen measures in the past that have, in some cases, tried to do the right thing and inadvertently have created huge burdens on SMEs. And I think our SME speakers, Max, was referring to that in some cases as well, of how regulation can be extremely burdensome and complex for SMEs to navigate.
Let's go into that a little bit more. Red tape is something that is said again and again by not just SMEs, right? This is across the board. This is one thing that the EU tries to tackle so much within its free trade agreements. Andrea, just for an industry perspective, is there, if you had one wish on how you could tackle the administrative burden, what would be the most helpful? What would be your wish? Oh, you're on mute again. Okay, lovely.
My wish is to come back to normality as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's everyone's wish.
I have a lot of wish, because I'm trying to grow our business and our company. So my wish is to be part of a big project to how to and make part of the European investment for the European companies, but also in the industrial process. So in the building of new facilities, of new structural companies investment, but also to the commercial investment for the companies, to have this kind of helps in the future to rebuild what we lost and to keep growing.
Max, do you have anything to add there?
Basically, the pandemic showed how unprepared we, from a digital perspective, when we look at the government. If you look at the health departments, the state health departments, only a small fraction, they're using fax machines. They're not using even internet or any networks to communicate. And the same for any administrative act, to have it in a digital form, so we don't actually have to drive to the customs office, and we don't have to drive all over the place, or send it by mail. That would be something that would be really helpful. Speaking common language. Normally when you receive any forms of legislations, or it's so complicated. It's a legal document. But we need something that people understand. Who don't have access to lawyers. Or tax consultants. So just a simplification of the process, and that would really be helpful. For small individual businesses, with one or two people working there, it's impossible for them to get any government aid, because the process is so complicated to apply for it, and it costs them. They have to pay their tax attorney to administer the form, and so that would be really helpful.
Well, what could that look like, though? Are we talking a hotline? So there's someone on the end of the phone that you can call, whether it's at member state level or EU level, or is this a website, or is there some other platform? I think
Scandinavia is a good example how can be done. Basically every service, any public service can be accessed digitally, and we are a long way away from that. When I want to renew my passport, I need to make an appointment 2 months ahead, and then queue and waste a day or two just to get a passport, and I can't do it digitally, and I don't understand why that is so difficult.
Maria, I'd like to bring you in here. I think you had a question.
Yeah, if I may, Felicia, you've seen the process of negotiating all the recovery and resilience plans of the member states. So, from your perspective, what are the bottlenecks or the difficulties that you foresee during the coming years for implementing the plans? And where we should focus on? Is it a problem of time, demand, human resources, technical implementation issues, or what you could tell us?
Thanks, Maria. It's a very good question. I mean, these are huge amounts of money that need to be absorbed quite quickly until the middle of 2026, essentially. And so therefore, it will require a very thorough coordination within the member state, each member state, and coordination with the Commission. And it will require within member states adequate structures to be put in place to monitor that implementation, and not just monitor, but also help with the implementation, and be in touch with stakeholders, with regions, with cities, on a continuous basis to make sure that the implementation goes smoothly. And member states are setting up such structures, and we are paying a lot of attention to that when we discuss the plans and in our adoption of the plans, that those structures are in place to implement these plans. And also we're paying a lot of attention to the involvement of stakeholders, to the involvement so far of the stakeholders in the drawing up of the plans, and as importantly, or even more importantly, the involvement of stakeholders in the implementation.
Actually, I've got a question for Max and Andrea, but I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about it to answer it, because there's also a question from Lena. The reason I'm giving you a few minutes is you'll understand when I ask the question. So this is from an anonymous audience member. What would be, so this is from Max and Andrea, what would be your top 5 tips for SMEs considering exporting, both within the EU and further afield? So get scribbling. Top 5 tips for companies that are considering exporting both within the EU and elsewhere. Or if you don't have 5, as many as you've got would be really great to hear. Lena, just quickly over to you. You have a question too.
Yes, actually, I'm interested a bit in the assessment of the national recovery plans that are at the moment being approved. So, Felicia, just a quick question: have you started a bit any assessment of, let's say, the impact of these plans to SMEs? I mean, we know that there are quite a lot of, at the moment, there is a big adoption of these plans, but what is interesting to know is how much of this funding will go directly or indirectly to SMEs per member state. And again, what type of projects each country is foreseeing? Do you have a plan on your next steps on doing this type of assessment?
Just can we have a rather quick answer, just so that we just looking at the time now. Thank you.
Yeah, so Lena, we're doing a lot of statistics on the plans and analysis on the plans. There are a lot of numbers being run on the impact of the plans, and you will see this in our adoption decisions, impact in terms of GDP growth and number of jobs, but they're at aggregate level for the countries. We haven't done numbers on impact on SMEs, but all plans have measures dedicated to SMEs about business environment, the regulatory environment, and direct support, either for digitalization, whether it's getting more digital, acquiring digital skills, or tax incentives for digital investments, and direct financial support through equity instruments and other types of financial instruments. So there's a lot of support out there. We haven't done like a comprehensive overview of what's in there for SMEs, but it could be a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Max, so if you are a company considering starting to sell outside of your own company, what are your top 5 tips?
Okay, know your markets and your target groups. That's you can't do it without it. Focus. You know, you can't do everything. If you have a big portfolio, don't start with everything. Focus on what you think your target group wants. You know, analyze the market and what your competitors are offering when you enter the market. Find the right partner. That's essential. You can talk to your commerce chambers. They have lists of importing partners. That's really helpful. That's what we're doing. Don't overextend. When you have initial growth, when you enter a product, you're new, you're hot, everybody wants you, but you can overextend, and you need to draw your infrastructure with you. You know. So and the last point is have courage to fail. Failure is part of life, and failure is part of business. And if you don't have the courage, you need to be brave. You need to accept the risk. but don't give up. You know, just continue. You will have products which will not work in a certain market, but then continue, try something else, be creative, and then move forward. I think that's the package I would recommend.
Gosh, it's really quite inspirational there, Max.
Yeah.
I feel so good about it now. Matt, Andrea,
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with Max.
It's quite unfair to follow that, isn't it?
It's really, really correct. And we must be more digital. We must reach new customer with new ways. With and Alibaba is one of this new way for me, but I suppose also for a lot of other companies. This bad situation of COVID, I suppose that gave other ideas to the company to grow in a different way. Maybe if we want to find something positive in this bad pandemic.
Does anyone else on the panel have another tip or something they would like to add to that?
Pardon? No.
No, that's fine. If not, we were talking about Max mentioned there about digitalization, which is something that we have mentioned here, but only sort of in passing. We've only got a couple of minutes, but one thing that was sort of mentioned in the slides is also about the technology that's behind for SMEs and looking at infrastructure as well. So just while we've got a couple more minutes, I don't really want to keep picking on you, Max and Andrea, but I think I will anyway. If you don't mind me revealing this, when we had our pre-conference call, we had some connectivity issues within the panel, and it was a very valuable sort of illustration for us of, look, even when you're, especially now we're trying to work from home, we're realizing just that sort of the gaps that we have in our connectivity and in our tech. That's obviously a bigger question on infrastructure. But Max or Andrea too, is there anything that you would like to ask from the policymakers? You've got them right here in front of you, that can really help businesses and starting, sort of from today, without them digging up the road and putting in cables as we speak.
Andrea, you want to start?
You first.
No?
Go on.
There's nothing you'd like to say? That's fine. Annalisa, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's probably an underestimated issue that even in some of the most advanced economies, and without naming countries, probably definitely the largest economy in the EU, the connectivity is often an issue, particularly in rural areas. And we give a lot of importance to SMEs, and more in rural areas. And we've seen it with the pandemic. People moving sort of back to their regions, and e-commerce and internet can give huge possibilities to this area. I mean, I think Umbria would probably qualify as definitely as a rural area in Italy as well. And with good connectivity, you could trade from anywhere. You don't need to be in a city. You could be, you could be in the mountains. You can be on an island. What you need is good connectivity and good logistics. We haven't really talked a lot about logistics, but that's another very important point where national governments, local governments can really support SMEs. There were figures yesterday that came out about the huge increase in costs for logistics. I think Max has mentioned that as well. The need that there is for logistics. I mean, that's something that even local communities and local municipalities could help local SME with by providing, space, for example, to store and, for the first mile and last mile, it's always an issue for companies. So we think there is a lot of concrete ways that governments can help. Connectivity is definitely the base, and making sure that rural areas across the EU have good access to the digital world. That's for us is sort of the the basis that we need to start from. And then there's other creative ways. And looking at examples from other countries, we find as as somebody that goes to talk to different member states, we still see a lot of competition among member states instead of actually cooperating and seeing what programs are working in Spain that we could replicate in Germany or the other way around, instead of having countries kind of compete with each other on who's got the best programs.
Maria, would you like to come in on that, since that's quite a national
Yeah.
issue?
Thank you. I should say that in our recovery and resilience plan regarding digitization, SMEs, connectivity, well, we will act in 3 different layers. The first one is basic connectivity. There's a component that will keep on investing on 5G networks. We've been doing that with ERDF fund for years, and with the Connecting Europe facility of the European Union as well. So first of all, provide basic access and an enough speed for citizens and companies to access to digital technologies. But in the recovery and resilience plan, we also foresee instruments to provide technology to SMEs. We will digitize under component 13 of the plan almost 1 million SMEs, providing applications such as ERP, CRM, cloud services, e-invoicing, etc., which is like a basic tools to make this transformation happen. And also we will act or put a huge effort on skills, because otherwise the transformation will not be effective. We need to train entrepreneurs, SMEs on how to use these technologies and what they can do with them.
We've got 2 minutes until the end now. I would just like to sort of open the floor to you each very quickly, just sort of 10, 20 seconds each, just a sentence or two, just as a closer to speaking to SMEs on this topic and on about how we can help them with barriers on exporting. Felicia, would you like to go first?
Thank you. For me, it has been really, really inspiring to hear from all of you, and in particular from Andrea and Max on kind of life on the ground for SMEs. And this is what we would like to continue to do as we start as the member states with our help start implementing these plans to hear really what is needed on the ground and how this can be done better.
Thank you. Maria, any very quick sentence?
Well, the internal market of the EU offers incredible opportunities to SMEs, and we have also to put a focus on third countries and provide the capacities to SMEs to export.
Thank you. Lena?
Yes, I would like to say that just approving the national recovery plans is just the first step in the whole lengthy process. Again, I would like to put emphasis in the implementation of the recovery and resilience plans with respect to governance, monitoring mechanisms, and also please take into consideration that a lot of funding will go to regional and also local, let's say, authorities. So we need also to involve the stakeholders.
Thank you. Max, a very quick sentence. We're just running out of time, so just very quickly.
Well, anything that helps in terms of cutting red tape, providing funding for digital infrastructure, getting access to finance, that will help. And also training people is the biggest issue that we face. Finding qualified staff is a big issue. Kids learning Latin in school, but not about AI, not about IT. No, that's a big issue. We need to rethink education to be ready for digital world.
Yeah, very interesting point. Andrea?
Yes. Before you asked me about my wish, I forgot to say one thing. I hope that in the future recovery plan will be something that can calm down the transport rates, because in my opinion there is a big speculation from the ship owners, from the container owners, because it's really impossible right now to ship a container in the US or in China without paying a double or 3 times rate respect last year. And this is a big issue, because it's all costs that are charged on the final prices to the final consumer. So there is also a big
interesting point. Yeah, that's a really, unfortunately we're just running out of time, but that's a really interesting point to raise right at the end there. And Annalisa, I'll give you the last word.
Sure, fine. No, I think we have a great opportunity here, so let's not spoil it.
All right, thank you so much, everyone on the panel. It's been really interesting having this discussion today. There's so much more we could say, obviously, but thank you also to everyone in the audience for joining us today, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.